Hello, welcome to another Becoming a Modern Man. We are playing Bogles, and here is a quick look at the deck list. And our next matchup is against Whirza, which is the deck that was run by Team Lotus Box to a lot of good finishes at the SCG Open Atlanta. So that's the matchup coming up now. Okay, so this is game one. This is our opening hand. It's not too bad, to be honest. Obviously, ideally we want to draw another land, but we've got the turn 1 scout and a number of 1 mana enchantments, so I think we can be pretty happy with this hand. So we're on the play here. I'm going to lead off with the scout. Pass the turn. Cracks the delta, gets a breeding pool, and plays Gilded Goose. Which gives us a bit of an indication as to what they are. I'm at the time of playing, as I say, I'm getting back into Modern after a brief break of a couple of months. So there's a lot to learn. I wasn't fully sure exactly what was going on here, but I have since learned that this is a sort of Whirza or Oko control seems to be, or sort of Oko mid-range seems to be like the main type of decks that are running Gilded Goose. Basically, the primary use for Gilded Goose is just to make this food token, essentially, which gives you an extra artifact for free, which can trigger Mox Opal, can get Emery online. So those are all good options. We didn't draw a land for our turn, unfortunately, so we're going to take the opportunity to deal as much damage as possible. So we're just going to Rancor up this scout and get into 3. Put it down to 14. I'm going to play a Spell Bomb, a Misty Rainforest, and pass the turn. So that's pretty good. Fairly unexciting turn for our opponent. We draw a Gatecraver Scout again. No second land for us, unfortunately. So I guess we're just going to equip. We probably should have equipped the Rancor here. I went for the Hyena Umbra just in case the opponent does get some sort of removal, because thanks to Total Armor we can then save the Scout. But I think in hindsight that probably wasn't necessary, because the only removal they're likely to have is Engineered Explosives, which would be pretty problematic for us anyway. So we probably should have just dealt as much damage as we could have done there. But makes a food token end of turn with their goose. Passes the turn. Back to us. It's on the second land. I'm going to equip our Rancor here. I'm going to look to attack, but our opponent's going to have Cryptic here. And it's just going to tap draw. And then sack their Spell Bomb to draw another card. Opponent plays Oko. Oko's not really too concerning for us, as all our creatures have, well, like our major creatures have Hexproof, so them stealing our guy is not something that we have to worry about. Obviously, there's still powerful things they can do, but it's generally value plays on making elks, etc., out of their food tokens, which none of which immediately concern us. They can get in the way, but certainly not the worst thing to be happening here. Plays Emery. They don't really put anything exciting into the graveyard, so they're not. There's no Bauble or anything, so Emery's not at its most powerful just yet. You can turn a food token into an elk, but fortunately we've got Griff's Boon, so we can fly over these ground stallers, and we don't have to worry too much about elks. So here I'm just going to attack Oko and take it off the board. As I said, we're not particularly concerned about it, but with our opponent on 8, I think it makes sense just to kill off the Oko on the basis that we're going to be able to attack for lethal next turn anyway. Maybe that's not quite right. I suppose potentially there is an issue that if our opponent sacks the food token that they gain 3 life. Oh yeah, but they don't have a food token because it's turned into an elk. See, these are the interactions that you need to remember. So yeah, so this loses its ability, so you can't sack the food anymore because it's been turned into an elk, and it's lost that ability. So yeah, I think attacking Oko makes sense here. Potentially as an argument to put them down to 1, and that way they can't crack any more fetch lands or anything like that, but I think it makes sense to just get Oko off the board here. So, don't crack the fetch, which obviously they wouldn't have been able to do had I attacked them down to 1, so I'm going to say that there is a logic to trying that. Mystic Sanctuary is going to pick back a Cryptic, so that is a mild concern. I mean, it's not a concern right now, but it does come into play later. So with Cryptic and Mystic Sanctuary, you can kind of create this sort of Eternal Command style situation, which was back when you used to have Avadile, Eternal Witness, and Cryptic Command, and then you would repeatedly bounce your Eternal Witness, and then file it back, the Eternal Witness, into play to get back your Cryptic Command. So essentially you can counter or bounce, counter something every turn, which is essentially the situation here. You can counter a spell and put Mystic Sanctuary back into your hand, or you can tap all the opponent's creatures and put Mystic Sanctuary back into your hand and replay Mystic Sanctuary, put Cryptic Command back on top. So they can do that repeatedly. So that's definitely a problem for later on. Replace Spellbomb with Emery. They play a Sword of the Meek, which is part of the Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meek combo, which is in the deck. And they're going to equip that to the Gilded Goose, so they potentially aren't dead here. They can chump with the Gilded Goose and save themselves some life, so they're not immediately dead. So another reason why maybe we should have attacked them instead of Oko on that previous turn. Fortunately, we're in good shape as we draw our second land finally. We can use All That Glitters, which is another new Thrones of Eldraine, I have no idea how to say it, card, and that is going to give us enough power to attack through the Gilded Goose and still kill the opponent. So that wraps up game 1. So in terms of things we want to bring in against an Whirza deck, I guess is what it is. That's what we've been calling it, Sultai Whirza, or War of Invention and Urza deck. So what do we want to bring in? I don't think Damping Sphere does anything particularly useful. It can tax them, but if they get Urza into play, they can generate so much mana that it doesn't really matter. And it might be more punishing for us to have the Damping Sphere in play. I think Suppression Field is good. Obviously, we've already got those in the main deck as well. A couple of copies. Suppression Field seems like it's pretty good as a way of taxing them for using the various abilities. Again, doesn't work against Urza, so I suppose it's got a similar problem to Damping Sphere. But it does make things a little bit more tricky for them. And it's less taxing on us by return. Stony Silence obviously good to turn off their artifacts abilities. Canonist isn't really any good here. I'm not sure whether this should still be in the sideboard. It's kind of a hangover from a previous list that I had, and maybe it's not really where we want to be anymore. We could bring in the Path to deal with Emery, because obviously Emery is just a little bit annoying if they can repeatedly gain value off it. So that's a potential option, but I'm not so sure whether that's a good idea. In terms of cards to take out, we probably don't need a Ledge Walker. I don't think it makes a ton of difference, given they've got Gilded Goose, which is a flyer, so they can block anyway. We could probably cut the Keen Sense, as it's unlikely to come up quite so much. And maybe the Spider Umbras as well. Obviously protecting our guys is important, particularly against engineered explosives, but maybe not quite as important as some other additional hate cards to bring into the main deck. We've also got Nature's Claim, which we might consider bringing in. I don't know how much we want that. yeah, certainly for engineered explosives, it's useful to have something to get rid of artifacts on their side of the board. I think I did bring some Nature's Claims in, but I think maybe that wasn't fully correct. Because really destroying any of their individual artifacts isn't all that powerful, particularly if they've got an Emery as well in play. So we will move on to game 2. Okay, so here we are in game 2. This is our opening hand, which looks pretty decent. I think we're going to run with this. Looks like some Misty, Watery Grave into a Thoughtseize. So I, obviously not knowing our opponent's list as well as I might have done it had I tried to look it up, I suppose, didn't know they were running Thoughtseize. So obviously Thoughtseize is a pretty bad situation for us here. So I'm going to run out the Windswept Heath here. On the basis that we are going to probably look to get Dryad Arbor so that we can actually get something going. We obviously don't want to give our opponent too much time. I think that's probably the main weakness of their deck, is just that their deck can be a little slow. And obviously just needs that time to set up, so we want to be as aggressive as possible, really. So I'm going to get the Dryad Arbor here. They've got Emery and the Gilded Goose, so they've had a pretty good turn. They've also got the Bauble, so they can start drawing 2 cards a turn with Bauble as well, so potentially problematic. Fortunately we draw a Scout, which I'm going to play the Scout instead of just equipping everything on the Dryad Arbor on the basis that they might have Oko, and that would be problematic for us. So I'd rather put my my enchantments on a hexproof creature. So I'm just going to stick Ethereal Armor on the Glade Cover Scout and pass the turn. Gets past Bauble, plays a Delta, plays another Emery, sacking the previous Emery, and then puts quite a bit of action into the graveyard. So they've got Mox Opal, they've got Engineered Explosives as well, which is probably one of the most problematic cards for us. So, Temple Garden. I think I misplay here. I could have played a Coronet, but I tapped the wrong lands. So I wanted to get the Spider Umbra on our creature to protect against explosives. I think I probably played that wrong. So swinging for 6. I'm just going to block. I mean, maybe we should have played this better. I don't think I fully picked up on the fact that an opponent put Engineered Explosives into the graveyard, and they can actually buy that back with Emery, which I think is what we're going to see here. So yeah, Engineered Explosives for 1. Blows it up. We get to keep the Glade Cover Scout thanks to Totem Armor, but we are in a tricky shape here. We've got another Hyena Umbra, so we can again protect our Scout, but life is going to be tricky moving forwards here. So we've got our opponent down to 7. Not quite sure what our opponent Mystic Sanctuary back there. Might have been a Cryptic. Yeah, so again, buyback explosives. And yeah, I think they got back Cryptic, so they're going to tap here. We've drawn Suppression Field, so we can play that, which does make cracking explosives a lot more difficult for our opponent. Or using any food tokens, etc. But yeah, they've got the Cryptic Lock here, which makes our life very hard. So yeah, again, opponent uses Engineered Explosives, which means we don't really have any very good attacks against Emery. Try to activate Griff's Boon, but actually Suppression Field prevents that by making it cost 2 more, which is a little bit annoying in this scenario. Cryptic is going to bounce suppression field. I mean, yeah, we're really in a bad situation here. Opponent's going to start using an Oko and making 3/3s, whereas we're in a situation where we can't really do a whole lot. Going to crack Horizon Canopy, but not really finding any action. And yeah, we just have limited options here. I think I don't know whether there's a way we could have better played around what our opponent had, but at this point we're now stuck under our opponent having a Cryptic every turn, and us just not having much in the way of action. They're also drawing extra cards every turn thanks to Emery, ticking up Oko. They can gain additional life if they want to, so yeah, we're just really far behind, and I can't really see a way of getting back into it. This Coronet's basically dead. We can attach Griff's Boon here and fly in for 2. I don't think there's a lot our opponent can do without that apart from bounce the Griff's Boon. I guess, and they can block if they so desired. Okay, so they get Whirza for Fop the Foundry, which allows them to block and kill the scout. And then yeah, I think we probably died a few turns ago. I did play it out a little bit longer, but yeah, there we go. Concede from there. So yeah, I suppose that's a good example of what their deck is looking to do. I don't think they got everything quite online, but essentially they can take control. They can set up a sort of like Cryptic, at least counter 1 spell, return Cryptic every turn. Sort of scenario, and then it becomes quite difficult to deal with that, and then they've also got various combos of Thopter Foundries. Oko can sort of build up their battlefield by turning their artifacts into elks, and build up food counters. So yeah, eventually they took control of the game, and there wasn't really much coming back from that. So let's go on to game 3. Okay, so this is our opener for game 3. So yeah, it does appear we did bring in Nature's Claim. I think in hindsight that probably is wrong. It's not all that good in this matchup, so we probably should have stuck with the Stony Silences and Suppression Fields. But I think it does work out here. So this is our opening hand. Obviously we don't have a turn, we don't have like a 1-drop, but we do have Call Spirit Dancer. Given that I assume that their deck doesn't run a whole lot of removal, I mean there might be a Fatal Push in there somewhere, but it's not really removal based. Call Spirit Dancer seems pretty good. Spirit Dancer also, if we are able just to target it, gets a lot bigger buffs from having an auras attached to it, so that allows us to kill our opponent quite a lot quicker, given the opportunity. Again, we do have to worry about Oko, I suppose, in that Spirit Dancer isn't hexproof, but I think this works out pretty nicely. Spirit Dancer also doesn't die to Engineered Explosives, which is definitely relevant. I mean, it does die to Engineered Explosives, but they have to tick it up to 2 instead of 1, and obviously we get to draw quite a lot of cards off Spirit Dancer, all being well. So one plays Bauble, Engineered Explosives on 1, which obviously would be pretty devastating had we not had this Spirit Dancer. Opponent Baubles, plays an Opal, which they can't activate because they sacked the Bauble. So things are not going terribly well on their side of the field, it would appear. We draw another Spirit Dancer, which is great. I think we're just going to run this out here. We can obviously kill our opponent a lot quicker if we'd gone Hyena Umbra into Daybreak Coronet into attack you, but I quite like the idea of just drawing a bunch of cards here. Maybe that's wrong. Also, we are potentially vulnerable to engineered explosives if we'd gone like Hyena Umbra into Daybreak Coronet. Engineered explosives could get rid of the Umbra or the Rancor, and then the Daybreak Coronet would fall off because it has to have another aura attached to it. So I didn't really like that potential line of play where we lose quite a lot of value. Rancor auras return to hand, so there's no real value in them cracking explosive to destroy a Rancor. So we're in pretty good shape here. Attack for 4. Drawn on the Daybreak Coronet as well, so even Oko is not too much of a concern now because we can pump up both our Spirit Dancers to be fairly big. Pump up the Gilded Goose, which is going to be allow the Mox Opal to come online, so they can sack Engineered Explosives. I'm going to Nature's Claim here. Opponent's not going to crack the explosives because it kills their Gilded Goose and only destroys our Rancor, which we would get back immediately. And yeah, our opponent concedes from here, seeing the writing on the wall. They're obviously not in a great shape. We can Daybreak Coronet. We actually drew another Spirit Dancer, which is kind of insane. But yeah, we can play Coronet, I suppose, and maybe Hyena Umbra, the other Spirit Dancer, and attack for quite a lot. And yes, I think that kind of wraps things up. I mean, potentially we can even attack for... I'm not sure we've got quite lethal, but we have got a lot of damage that we can throw at our opponent. And yeah, that wraps things up. Also, meanwhile, we would have drawn a bunch of cards. So yeah, Spirit Dancer seemed very good in this matchup. And fortunately, it turned up in multiples, which made our life very easy. And yeah, our opponent didn't really get off to a great start, which also helped. Kind of an interesting matchup. I think we're reasonably well positioned against this deck from what I've seen of it. I mean, really, the ideal thing to do is to be as aggressive as possible and kill their opponent before they set up. Because although their deck is powerful, it does seem that it takes quite a while to set things up for them to take full control of the game. So yeah, being aggressive against them and obviously having hexproof creatures that can't be stolen by Oko or turned into Elks, etc., is pretty good. So yeah, I think this worked out pretty nicely, and we managed to pick up the win.